It began as an ordinary day in a quiet suburban home, the kind of day where nothing remarkable ever seemed to happen. But hidden in the dusty corners of the old attic was an object that had escaped attention for decades, a simple photograph, faded at the edges, tucked away inside a worn leather album. No one had seen it in over 80 years. To most, it would have seemed insignificant. A black and white image, slightly curled, showing the faint outline of people whose faces were barely visible, their expressions frozen in time. But this photograph, seemingly mundane at first glance, would soon unravel a story that no one in the family could have predicted, a story that had been quietly waiting to resurface, like a shadow lurking just beyond the light. The family who stumbled upon it had always thought they knew their history. They had stories passed down through generations, tales of ancestors who were hardworking, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Birthdays, weddings, and holiday gatherings had been carefully chronicled in albums and journals. Yet, as the photo was carefully lifted from its hiding place, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, an uneasy feeling filled the room. There was something about this photograph that was different, something that demanded attention. It wasn't just the people in it, but the way the scene was framed, the way the shadows fell across the faces, hinting at a hidden tension that had never been spoken of aloud. For years, family members had shared fleeting memories of a relative who had mysteriously disappeared, a story that was always brushed off as one of those old family mysteries meant to intrigue children but never truly explained. Names were whispered, dates were misremembered, and speculation ran wild. But now, looking at this single photograph, the puzzle pieces began to take shape. The image contained subtle clues: the angle of a hand resting on a chair, the tilt of a head, the position of objects in the background, all details that suggested this moment was not captured by chance. Someone had chosen to preserve it. Someone had wanted this story to survive, even if only in silence, hidden away for 80 years. As the family examined the photograph more closely, curiosity turned into unease. Who were these people, and why had this image been hidden? The answer seemed just out of reach, lying in the fine details, almost like the photo itself was daring them to uncover the truth. There was an urgency to the mystery, a pull that seemed almost magnetic. Each family member felt it differently. Some were fascinated, others fearful, but none could ignore it. The photograph was more than a memory. It was a revelation waiting to unfold, a key to a past that had long been buried. It wasn't long before the family realized that the photo might not be merely an ordinary keepsake. Its discovery coincided with the unearthing of old letters and documents tucked away in drawers and boxes that had never been opened. Handwritten notes in fading ink, legal documents from decades ago, and fragments of diaries hinted at events that contradicted the family story they had always believed. Every piece of evidence added weight to the photograph, and slowly, a narrative began to emerge, one that suggested secrets had been deliberately concealed. Secrets that, when revealed, had the power to rewrite everything they thought they knew about their lineage, their identity, and their family legacy. The more they studied the photo, the more questions arose. Who had taken it and why? Why had it been hidden so meticulously? Was it merely forgotten, or had someone intentionally removed it from sight to protect, or perhaps conceal, the truth? And most importantly, what did it reveal about the people in it, the events surrounding them, and the generations that followed? Every family meeting now centered around that photograph. What had once been a simple curiosity transformed into an obsession, as they sought to decode every subtle detail. Shadows became clues, expressions became messages, and even the background, previously dismissed as unremarkable, became a landscape of potential revelations. Then came the moment when realization struck. This photograph was not just about the past. It was about the present, about the family themselves, about the stories they had inherited, and the legacy they were unknowingly carrying forward. It was as if the image had been waiting for this precise moment, for the right eyes to look upon it, for the right minds to make sense of what had been deliberately concealed. And with that realization, the family understood that their history was far more complicated, far more layered, than they had ever imagined. The photograph had the power to alter their perception of themselves, to challenge the very foundation of what they believed their story to be. This was not just the discovery of an old photo, it was the opening of a time capsule that had been carefully sealed for 8 decades. And as the family prepared to dig deeper into the mysteries it held, none of them could have predicted the full extent of what they were about to uncover. The photograph, small and seemingly insignificant, had already begun to change everything. And what it revealed in the coming weeks would shock not just them, but anyone who would hear the story. A story of hidden truths, long-held secrets, and a family history rewritten in ways that no one saw coming. The family at the center of this story had always considered themselves ordinary, with roots stretching back generations in a quiet, unassuming town. Their ancestors were not famous, nor were they wealthy. They were people whose lives were defined by small victories, everyday struggles, and the tight bonds of kinship. Family gatherings were simple affairs, shared meals, laughter echoing through the house, and stories recounted of relatives long gone. But behind the facade of normalcy, there was a history threaded with complexity, with moments of tension and quiet tragedy that had been carefully tucked away, like fragile heirlooms meant to be protected from prying eyes. It all began with the grandparents, a couple whose life together had been both devoted and secretive. They were well respected in their community, quiet pillars of reliability, attending local church functions, hosting modest holiday dinners, and offering advice to neighbors. Yet, as family lore often conceals, there were chapters of their lives that nobody dared to speak about. Their home, filled with familiar warmth and comfort, also housed hidden drawers, locked cabinets, and trunks in the attic that were rarely, if ever, opened. Inside these containers lay letters, photographs, and journals, fragments of experiences the family had been shielded from, deliberately or unconsciously, to preserve a narrative of simplicity and stability. The story that surrounded the photograph began in the early 1940s, during a period when the world itself was undergoing seismic changes. Political tensions, global conflict, and economic uncertainty created an atmosphere where secrets were not just personal, but protective. The grandparents, along with several cousins, uncles, and aunts, had been caught in moments of private turmoil that no public eye could witness. A cousin, whose name had been whispered only occasionally in family gatherings, had made decisions that, if revealed, might have disrupted reputations and relationships. An argument that escalated into estrangement, a failed marriage quietly dissolved, and a series of misunderstandings created rifts that would last for decades. In the shadows of these events, the photograph had been taken, an image that captured not only faces, but hidden intentions, unspoken emotions, and perhaps even evidence of choices best left concealed. The family who discovered the photograph had long assumed that their history was linear and straightforward. They had memorized dates of births and deaths, tracked marriages and relocations, and celebrated milestones with the certainty of tradition. But as they began piecing together documents alongside the newly found photograph, inconsistencies emerged. A letter written in the 1940s referenced a meeting that nobody alive could remember. Names appeared in journals that had no connection to family trees as they were known. Even the photograph itself, once believed to be a casual snapshot, revealed subtle signs of orchestration. The deliberate placement of objects, the positioning of bodies, and the faint indications that someone had staged the scene to convey a message to future generations, one that remained hidden for decades. At first, the family struggled to make sense of it. Memories conflicted with evidence, and anecdotes passed down through the generations suddenly seemed incomplete or misleading. Questions began to multiply. Why had the photograph been hidden so carefully? Who had taken it, and for what purpose? And most importantly, what truth had been deliberately obscured? Each answer seemed to only raise more questions, pulling the family into a deep, complex web of personal history that demanded patience, observation, and meticulous investigation. This was not a story that could be unraveled quickly. It required time, and above all, attention to detail, much like examining the subtle textures and shadows of the photograph itself. The older generation, the grandparents, uncles, and aunts, had their own reasons for maintaining secrecy. Some had feared judgment or gossip, while others simply wanted to protect the younger members of the family from stories they might not yet be ready to understand. Secrets, after all, were double-edged. They preserved reputation but also carried the weight of omission. The photograph, therefore, became a silent witness, a frozen moment capturing more than just smiles and attire. It captured a choice, a tension, a decision that had profound implications for everyone in the family. And yet, for 80 years, it had remained tucked away, invisible to those who might have seen its importance, waiting for the day when someone would finally have the curiosity and courage to uncover it. In those early days, before the photograph was rediscovered, family members often speculated about what might have been lost to history. They had spoken in vague terms about relatives who had disappeared, about unexplained absences, and about personal tragedies that were glossed over in family lore. But they had never connected these fragments to a single artifact, the photograph. It was only when it resurfaced, carefully examined, that the gravity of its presence became clear. Each line, shadow, and expression began to tell a story of events long forgotten, offering clues to interactions, alliances, and decisions that shaped the family's present. It revealed a layer of history that had been meticulously hidden but was always there, waiting to be seen. As the family began to map out the connections between the photograph and the people in it, they realized that their understanding of their past was incomplete. Stories they had taken for granted were now being questioned. Events they had assumed were trivial now seemed pivotal. The photograph had not just captured a moment in time, it had preserved a turning point, a choice that had been deliberately obscured, and consequences that had rippled through generations. And with this realization came the dawning awareness that the history they thought they knew, safe, simple, and linear, was, in fact, far more intricate, far more human, and far more surprising than anyone could have imagined. By the end of this section, the family understood that uncovering the photograph's secrets would not merely satisfy curiosity, it would redefine their identity, challenge long-held beliefs, and alter the way they saw themselves and their ancestors. The photograph was no longer just an object. It was a portal into hidden histories, a bridge between what was known and what had been intentionally concealed, and the first step in a journey that would unravel the very fabric of their family story. The discovery of the photograph was not dramatic in the way movies often portray. No sudden scream, no ancient chest bursting open. It was quiet, almost mundane, yet heavy with significance. It happened on a late autumn afternoon when the sunlight slanted through the attic window at just the right angle to illuminate dust particles dancing lazily in the air. A young member of the family, tasked with cleaning out old boxes, pulled down a leather-bound album from the highest shelf, its cover faded and edges fraying. At first, it seemed like an ordinary family album, filled with faded memories of holidays, birthdays, and casual gatherings. But then, tucked carefully between pages, they found it, the photograph that had remained hidden for 80 years. The initial reaction was one of curiosity tinged with disbelief. Faces that no one living could fully identify stared out from the image, frozen in a moment that had long been lost to memory. But there was something undeniably arresting about it. The expressions on the people's faces were not entirely casual. They carried subtle hints of tension, of unspoken emotion. The way one figure leaned slightly away, or how another's eyes seemed to look past the camera, suggested layers of interaction that were invisible at first glance. It was clear that this was not merely a snapshot. It was a carefully captured moment, perhaps staged, perhaps accidental, but profoundly meaningful. The family gathered around the attic, the photograph passed from hand to hand, each person studying it with increasing intensity. Conversations began hesitantly at first, then grew louder, each member trying to place faces and guess identities. Old family stories surfaced, names and events once whispered in passing now suddenly gaining context. Questions piled on one another. Why had no one spoken of this photo before? Who had taken it? What had happened to the people captured in it, and why had it been hidden? The photograph seemed almost to demand answers, as if it carried a silent warning. To understand it fully, they would need to dig deeper, to confront the family's forgotten past. As the family examined the photograph, they noticed details that at first seemed inconsequential but gradually became impossible to ignore. A hand resting on a chair, slightly curled, a shadow that fell oddly across the floor, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge in the background. Every detail hinted at something larger, a story hidden within the mundane. It was the kind of image that demanded patience, careful observation, and imagination. Some family members were skeptical, seeing only a faded photo from another era, while others felt a deep, inexplicable pull, as if the photograph were calling them to uncover what had been deliberately concealed. To understand the photo's significance, they began comparing it with other family artifacts, letters, diaries, and official documents. A letter from 1942 mentioned a gathering that aligned perfectly with the date suggested by the photograph's style and clothing. A diary entry referenced a cousin who had mysteriously left town, never to return, and a trunk filled with personal belongings hinted at unresolved conflict. Suddenly, the photograph was no longer an isolated object. It became a central piece in a puzzle that had been scattered across decades. Each new clue deepened the mystery, drawing the family further into the past. But it was not just the visual elements that intrigued them, it was the context. The photograph was carefully preserved, tucked away in a place few would find it. Whoever had hidden it clearly understood its value, its potential to reveal truths that might otherwise remain buried. It was almost as if the photographer, or the person who had concealed it, had anticipated a future generation capable of understanding its significance. The care taken to protect it suggested a deliberate act, a conscious effort to shield these secrets from casual discovery. And in that act of concealment lay a story of its own, a story about who had wanted these events remembered and who had wanted them forgotten. The more the family studied the photograph, the more patterns emerged. Expressions, body language, and small environmental details began to tell a subtle story. One figure, who had been assumed to be a minor relative, now appeared to be central to the event depicted. Another, whose face was partially obscured, seemed to convey an emotion inconsistent with the otherwise formal setting, an anxiety, a hesitation, a secret perhaps too dangerous to speak aloud. The photograph was revealing layers of history that had been obscured, and with each observation, the family realized just how little they truly knew about their own past. With each discovery came both excitement and unease. The photograph had transformed the attic into a site of inquiry, a space where questions multiplied faster than answers. Family members debated interpretations, cross-referenced memories with documents, and slowly began to construct a timeline of events that had led to the photograph being taken and hidden. It was clear that the image was more than a picture. It was evidence, a silent witness to choices and events that had repercussions still resonating through the family. Every shadow and expression seemed intentional, every object in the background purposeful. By the end of the first evening examining the photograph, the family understood one crucial truth. They had stumbled upon a key to a history that was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The image was not just a moment captured in time. It was a gateway to understanding decisions, secrets, and hidden narratives that had shaped their lineage. And as they prepared to investigate further, they could not have known just how much their understanding of themselves and their family story would be forever changed. The photograph had begun to pull them in, promising revelations that would redefine everything they thought they knew. As the family continued to examine the photograph, the initial curiosity gradually transformed into a sense of profound revelation. It was no longer just an intriguing relic from the past. It had become a window into a reality they had never truly confronted. Each glance seemed to peel back another layer of history, exposing details that had been carefully masked over decades. Expressions, body language, and even subtle details in the background began to reveal connections, alliances, and conflicts that had been forgotten, or perhaps intentionally obscured. What had seemed like a simple family gathering now hinted at tensions that were simmering beneath the surface, events that would later ripple across generations. The first revelation came when they identified a figure in the corner of the photograph, previously assumed to be a minor relative. Yet, something about the posture, the expression, and the placement within the scene suggested a role far more significant than anyone had realized. By cross-referencing letters, diaries, and other photographs, the family discovered that this individual had been at the center of a dispute that had caused a long-standing rift in the family, a rift that older members had always avoided discussing. Suddenly, the photograph was no longer just an image. It had become evidence of a pivotal moment, capturing a hidden confrontation, perhaps even the first spark of a conflict that had shaped the family's future. Alongside this realization came the discovery of a long-lost letter hidden in a drawer for decades. The letter, penned in hurried, almost panicked handwriting, referenced an event that had been shrouded in mystery. It spoke of a disagreement, a sudden departure, and decisions made that would affect the family for years to come. Reading the letter, the younger generation began to understand that the photograph was not merely a visual document. It was part of a larger narrative, a puzzle piece that fit into a story of secrecy, anxiety, and unspoken truths. The photograph had been deliberately preserved, not by accident, but because someone had recognized its power to reveal what had been concealed. The emotional impact on the family was immediate and intense. Some felt shock, others disbelief, and a few were overwhelmed by a sense of betrayal. How could so much have been kept hidden for so long? How could they have grown up believing in a version of their history that was incomplete, perhaps even misleading? The photograph, in combination with the letters and other documents, forced them to confront the reality that their understanding of their own identity was far less complete than they had imagined. This was a moment of reckoning, a confrontation with the past that demanded attention, courage, and honesty. As they delved deeper, additional clues emerged. The background of the photograph revealed objects that had gone unnoticed for years: a partially open door, a chair turned at an unusual angle, a window showing the faint outline of a figure outside. These details suggested that what was captured in the photograph was not entirely private. Someone else had been present, observing, or perhaps even influencing the events that unfolded. This realization added another layer of intrigue and urgency. The photograph was no longer simply a memory. It was a silent witness to decisions, actions, and interactions that had been hidden from view, yet had profound consequences for everyone involved. The family also began to piece together the timeline of events surrounding the photograph. They discovered that it had been taken during a particularly tumultuous period, marked by personal struggles, social pressures, and events that had strained relationships. The photograph, it seemed, captured a crossroads, a moment where choices were made, alliances formed or broken, and secrets buried. Every expression and gesture now seemed loaded with meaning, a look exchanged between two people, a subtle gesture of defiance, the careful arrangement of objects that suggested intention rather than coincidence. The deeper they examined the photograph, the more it revealed about the complexity of the family's past. One of the most startling revelations came when the family recognized a figure who had long been considered peripheral in the family story. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that this individual had played a crucial role in events that had shaped the family's trajectory. Diaries and letters confirmed that their influence had been significant, yet unacknowledged in oral histories and family lore. It was a revelation that challenged assumptions and forced the family to reconsider their understanding of relationships, loyalties, and power dynamics within their own lineage. The photograph had not only preserved an image, but had captured the intricate interplay of influence and secrecy that defined that era. As the initial shock subsided, the family began to piece together connections between the photograph and other historical records. They discovered patterns in correspondence, financial documents, and property records that corroborated what the photograph hinted at. The image had preserved evidence of decisions that had been made behind closed doors, actions that had altered the course of the family's history, and interactions that had remained unspoken for generations. It became clear that the photograph was more than a relic. It was a map, guiding them through a labyrinth of hidden truths, carefully concealed motivations, and choices that had long-lasting effects. By the end of this phase of investigation, the family understood something essential. The photograph was a bridge between what had been forgotten and what was now coming to light. It forced them to confront the consequences of secrets, the impact of omissions, and the ways in which history could be reshaped by what was hidden versus what was revealed. Emotions ran high: grief for the loss of clarity, awe at the complexity of their ancestry, and a deep respect for the resilience of those who had lived through the events now captured in the photograph. This section of discovery set the stage for the family's deeper investigation, one that would require careful analysis, courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and the determination to understand how a single photograph could alter the perception of their entire history. The photograph, once hidden and forgotten, had begun to speak. And the family, for the first time in decades, was listening. The discovery of the photograph was only the beginning. Once the family realized its significance, curiosity quickly transformed into a meticulous investigation. What started as a casual glance through an attic quickly evolved into a full-fledged search for clues, as the family explored old trunks, boxes, and drawers that had long been ignored. Each item they uncovered, letters, journals, legal documents, and faded photographs, added layers to the story, providing context for the enigmatic image that had surfaced after 80 years. What had once seemed like a single artifact of curiosity now became the centerpiece of a sprawling investigation into their own history. The first significant breakthrough came from a stack of letters bound with brittle twine. They had been written during the early 1940s, precisely around the period when the photograph was taken. The letters detailed family conflicts that had previously been passed over in whispered rumors, mentioning arguments about inheritance, personal disputes, and choices that had reshaped relationships. In reading them, the family began to notice connections between the letters and the photograph. Specific gestures, expressions, and even positions of the people in the photo seemed to correlate with events mentioned in the correspondence. It was as if the photograph had been taken to memorialize a turning point, an unspoken event that would reverberate through generations. The journals were even more revealing. Pages filled with delicate cursive handwriting recounted daily life, but also hinted at secrets carefully guarded. One entry described a tense dinner gathering where a disagreement quietly escalated, leaving one family member feeling alienated and another embittered. The photographs captured during that period, when compared with the newly found image, suggested that the person in question may have deliberately staged the scene to record or communicate something to future generations. The journals emphasized the care with which moments were documented, revealing a consciousness about legacy, reputation, and the preservation of certain truths, while simultaneously hiding others. As the investigation deepened, the family discovered legal documents from decades past, including property transfers, wills, and court filings. Some of these records seemed mundane at first glance, but under scrutiny, they began to reveal inconsistencies and unusual decisions. Certain bequests had been altered, some names omitted, and timelines did not align with the stories they had been told. The photograph, it seemed, was a visual companion to these documents, a piece of evidence silently corroborating events that had been kept hidden from public view. The realization hit hard. For years, they had accepted a sanitized version of history, never suspecting that key moments were missing or misrepresented. In piecing these elements together, patterns began to emerge. The photograph no longer seemed random. It appeared to mark the intersection of pivotal events, an argument that led to estrangement, a decision that altered property inheritance, and a secret act that shaped family relationships for decades. Objects in the background of the photo, furniture, books, even a faint shadow in a doorway, now took on new significance, appearing as markers of timing, intent, and context. Every small detail became a clue, prompting further investigation and deeper reflection. The attic, once just a storage space, had transformed into a repository of memory and meaning, each artifact contributing to a story carefully hidden from sight. One particularly shocking discovery came in the form of a second, smaller photograph hidden behind a frame in the living room. Unlike the first, this image was less formal, more intimate, capturing a private moment that seemed almost forbidden. The juxtaposition of the two photographs, one formal, one intimate, revealed layers of family dynamics previously unrecognized. Expressions and body language suggested tensions, alliances, and decisions that had long-term repercussions. It was a silent narrative of cause and effect, showing how one choice could ripple across generations, shaping not only relationships but perceptions, reputations, and the family's sense of identity. The family also sought external verification, consulting historical records, newspapers, and public archives to corroborate the stories hinted at in the photographs and documents. News articles from the 1940s referenced events that aligned with certain letters, and census records confirmed some relationships and timelines while contradicting others. Each corroboration added credibility to the findings, while each contradiction heightened the mystery. By systematically connecting these dots, the family realized that the photograph was not an isolated anomaly. It was a keystone artifact, anchoring a much larger story of secrecy, consequence, and legacy. Through this investigative process, the family began to understand that the photograph had a dual purpose. On one hand, it preserved a memory, capturing faces and moments in time. On the other, it was a coded document, deliberately composed and concealed to communicate something to future generations. Its position in the attic, hidden but preserved, suggested forethought, a message meant to endure the passage of time. The photograph had waited for someone curious and attentive enough to decode it, someone willing to question long-accepted narratives and to confront uncomfortable truths about family history. By the end of this phase of investigation, the family had not only uncovered multiple artifacts, but had also begun to connect the intricate web of relationships, events, and choices that the photograph represented. Each discovery reinforced the idea that the past was not static, that history was not simply a series of dates and names, but a living story shaped by decisions, secrets, and revelations. The photograph, once hidden, had become a catalyst, compelling the family to face a past that was more complex, more human, and more profound than they had ever imagined. It was now clear that uncovering the truth would require courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront the shadows of their own lineage. As the investigation progressed, the quiet curiosity that had begun in the attic transformed into a wave of emotional intensity. The photograph, once a mysterious artifact, had now become a mirror reflecting the family's long-hidden truths. What started as intrigue turned into shock as they realized that the events captured in that single image were far more consequential than anyone had imagined. The photograph had preserved not just a moment in time, but the evidence of decisions, betrayals, and actions that had shaped the family's trajectory for generations. The first shocking revelation came when they discovered that a key figure in the photograph, someone they had always assumed to be a distant, unimportant relative, had played a pivotal role in a family conflict that had been carefully erased from memory. Letters and diaries corroborated the evidence. This individual had been involved in a financial dispute, secretly redirecting inheritance and property in ways that had caused lasting tension. The photograph, once seen as innocuous, now appeared deliberately composed, capturing the person at the exact moment of triumph or confrontation. Expressions, postures, and subtle glances all pointed to knowledge and intent, revealing actions that had quietly dictated family relationships for decades. The emotional impact was profound. Family members struggled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and disbelief. How could these secrets have been hidden for so long? How could events of such magnitude have been omitted from stories told around holiday tables and in whispered recollections? Conversations became heated as older generations attempted to explain their silence. Some spoke of protecting younger family members, shielding them from unpleasant truths. Others admitted fear of judgment or repercussions. Yet the younger generation, now facing the evidence directly, refused to accept these explanations as sufficient. The photograph and the corroborating documents had changed the narrative. It was no longer possible to pretend the past was simple or innocent. Further revelations deepened the tension. A second photograph, previously unnoticed, revealed an intimate scene that contradicted the family's understanding of loyalty and relationships. Two individuals who had been thought estranged were captured in a moment of secret collusion, their expressions suggesting a pact or agreement that no one had spoken of. When compared to letters and diary entries, the implications became undeniable. Alliances had shifted, choices had been made in secret, and the outcomes had reshaped the family structure. It was a confrontation with a truth long denied, a truth that challenged not only relationships, but the family's very sense of identity. The confrontation extended beyond mere revelation. It sparked emotional reckoning. Family members debated motives, questioned decisions, and re-examined their understanding of loyalty and trust. Long-standing assumptions were dismantled, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of human behavior. The photograph had acted as a catalyst, forcing the family to confront uncomfortable questions. How much had they truly known about their ancestors? How had secrets shaped their own lives and identities? Were they merely inheritors of a curated history, or were they now participants in a new narrative of discovery and truth? Perhaps the most difficult realization was the recognition of intentional concealment. Certain events, now illuminated through the photograph and supporting evidence, had been deliberately hidden. The reasons varied: protection, shame, self-interest, but the consequence was the same. Generations had grown up with an incomplete understanding of their history. The photograph, once hidden, was now a vessel of accountability, revealing not only what had happened, but the conscious choices to hide it. This duality, of action and omission, became a central theme in family discussions, shaping not only interpretations of the past, but also decisions about how to move forward. As emotions ran high, the family began to trace the ripple effects of these hidden secrets. They recognized that decisions made decades ago had influenced everything from inheritance patterns to marriage choices, from relationships to career paths. The photograph, in its silent way, provided clarity where memory and rumor had left gaps. Every shadow, every facial expression, and every detail in the background became evidence of cause and effect, teaching lessons about human nature, consequence, and the fragile web of trust that binds families together. The process of confrontation was not easy. Arguments flared, tears were shed, and old resentments resurfaced. Yet, through these challenges, the family also experienced a sense of connection and understanding that had been absent for years. The photograph had created a shared focus, a means of processing collective memory and uncovering hidden truths. It forced the family to engage in dialogue, to reconcile perspectives, and to confront difficult realities with honesty and courage. In doing so, it became more than a mere image. It became a catalyst for healing, understanding, and, ultimately, transformation. By the end of this stage, the family had reached a profound realization. The photograph did more than reveal a hidden moment. It revealed the layers of human experience that had shaped them. The events captured within it had consequences that extended far beyond the frame. They had challenged perceptions, disrupted assumptions, and, ultimately, altered the course of understanding their own history. What had begun as an ordinary discovery had become a journey of revelation, confronting the family with truths that were as transformative as they were unsettling. The revelations brought about by the photograph did not fade quickly. They reverberated through the family in ways that were both unexpected and profound. What had initially been a curiosity, a forgotten artifact hidden in an attic, had become a transformative force, altering perceptions of identity, relationships, and heritage. The family, now acutely aware of the depth and complexity of their past, began the long process of reassessing everything they thought they knew. Every story told, every anecdote shared, every long-accepted memory suddenly required reevaluation. What they had inherited was not just objects and names, but choices, secrets, and consequences that had endured for decades. The immediate consequence was a shift in family dynamics. Conversations that had once been casual now carried a weight of historical awareness. Younger members who had long respected the authority of older relatives found themselves questioning decisions, interpretations, and omissions. Older generations, meanwhile, faced the difficult task of explaining not just actions, but inactions. Why certain truths were hidden, why some events were emphasized while others were deliberately erased. The photograph had forced a reckoning, a confrontation with silence and omission that no family member could ignore. It became a lens through which every interaction, past and present, could be examined, understood, or even forgiven. Perhaps most striking was how the photograph reshaped the understanding of family identity. Prior to its discovery, the family narrative had been linear, comfortable, and largely uncomplicated. The past was a series of events that had led neatly into the present. But the photograph and the supporting evidence uncovered alongside it revealed that their history had been far from simple. Relationships had been complicated, alliances had shifted, and choices had consequences that rippled across generations. The family began to appreciate that identity was not static. It was shaped by secrecy, by revelation, and by the courage to confront truths long hidden. They realized that their story was not one of perfection, but of humanity, flawed, intricate, and ultimately resilient. The photograph also prompted a reevaluation of legacy. Previously, the family had viewed their heritage as a series of inherited names, properties, and traditions. Now, they saw it differently, as a tapestry woven from decisions, mistakes, loyalties, and betrayals. Each revelation forced them to confront the implications of their ancestors' choices. In some cases, the consequences were material, property arrangements, financial inheritances, or legal decisions. In others, the impact was emotional. Fractured relationships, unresolved grievances, and long-standing assumptions about who is trustworthy or honorable. The photograph, in its quiet yet commanding way, made clear that history was not simply about survival or chronology. It was about understanding the forces that had shaped them, both individually and collectively. In practical terms, the family began documenting their findings. They created a timeline of events, noting correspondences, photographs, and corroborating documents. Meetings were held to discuss interpretations, disagreements were debated, and context was painstakingly reconstructed. This process was both laborious and cathartic. It allowed the family to take ownership of their history, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to ensure that the lessons of the past would not be lost to future generations. The photograph had become more than an artifact. It had become a tool for reflection, education, and preservation, a cornerstone for a renewed sense of continuity. Yet, alongside the clarity came an acknowledgement of uncertainty. Not every question could be answered, not every mystery solved. Some intentions of ancestors remained opaque. Some events hinted at motives that could only be speculated upon. The photograph, while illuminating, did not provide a complete record. It offered a window, a guide, a catalyst. It forced the family to accept that history is often partial, subjective, and filtered through both memory and secrecy. The important lesson was not to achieve total understanding, but to embrace the complexity of truth, to honor the choices made, and to acknowledge the consequences that had endured through time. Emotionally, the experience fostered both connection and reconciliation. Long-standing disputes softened in the light of shared discovery. Family members who had felt distant found common ground in their investigation. The act of uncovering, analyzing, and discussing the photograph created a collaborative effort, binding them together through a shared purpose. They realized that history was not merely about facts, dates, or images. It was about relationships, understanding, and empathy. The photograph had forced them to confront each other, yes, but also to understand each other, to acknowledge vulnerabilities, and to create a new narrative that incorporated both the truths of the past and the possibilities of the present. By the end of this transformative phase, the family understood that the photograph had fundamentally altered their perception of who they were and where they came from. It had revealed hidden strengths and weaknesses, illuminated consequences of decisions made decades ago, and challenged assumptions that had been accepted without question. More than anything, it had demonstrated the power of memory, preservation, and curiosity. A single image, hidden for 80 years, had reshaped identity, healed old wounds, and created a renewed commitment to truth, transparency, and understanding. Ultimately, the photograph became a symbol, a reminder that history is not static and that the act of uncovering truth, no matter how unsettling, can bring clarity, reconciliation, and growth. The family, forever changed, now carried both the weight and the gift of this revelation, understanding that their story was no longer simply inherited, but consciously embraced and acknowledged. The discovery of the photograph, hidden for 80 years, had transformed from a quiet curiosity into a profound exploration of family, memory, and identity. By the time the family had pieced together the clues, traced relationships, and analyzed the long-hidden artifacts, it was clear that the photograph was far more than an image. It was a portal into understanding the complexities of human behavior and the intricate web of decisions that shaped generations. The story it revealed was not merely historical, it was deeply personal, forcing the family to confront the past with honesty, empathy, and courage. One of the most important lessons they learned was the power of context. The photograph, initially assumed to be a simple snapshot, revealed that every moment carries layers of meaning, much of it hidden from casual observation. Shadows, gestures, expressions, and placement of objects all provided insights that had been overlooked for decades. Each artifact uncovered alongside the photograph, letters, journals, legal documents, and secondary images, added context, illuminating motivations, relationships, and consequences that were otherwise invisible. The family came to understand that history is rarely as simple as it appears. It is a tapestry woven from both visible and hidden threads, each of equal importance in shaping the story. The process also revealed the enduring impact of secrecy. For decades, crucial events had been intentionally hidden or omitted from the family narrative, creating a version of history that was incomplete. The photograph, preserved and concealed, had served as a silent witness to those omissions, waiting for the right eyes to uncover its secrets. In confronting these truths, the family recognized the consequences of secrecy, not only on those directly involved but on future generations who inherited assumptions, misunderstandings, and partial truths. The revelation reinforced the value of transparency, dialogue, and the courage to face uncomfortable realities, even when it challenges long-held beliefs. Equally powerful was the realization of human resilience. While the secrets uncovered were shocking and at times emotionally unsettling, the family also saw examples of resourcefulness, care, and foresight in the actions of their ancestors. The photograph itself was a deliberate act of preservation, evidence that someone in the past understood the importance of memory, truth, and legacy. Even in the midst of conflict, deception, or fear, these choices demonstrated a conscious effort to protect and communicate knowledge across generations. The family now understood that resilience and foresight can take many forms, often subtle but enduring, leaving an imprint that survives long after the immediate events have passed. The emotional impact of the discoveries was profound. Conversations that had once been superficial or avoided entirely became meaningful discussions about identity, values, and family history. Disputes that had lingered for years found opportunities for reconciliation, as shared understanding and recognition of past circumstances softened resentment and fostered empathy. The family realized that uncovering hidden truths does not merely reveal the past, it also reshapes the present, encouraging reflection, dialogue, and deeper connections. The photograph, once hidden, had ultimately become a catalyst for healing as well as understanding. Beyond personal impact, the family recognized the importance of preserving these discoveries for future generations. The photograph and accompanying documents were no longer relics to be hidden away. They became part of a consciously curated record, ensuring that future family members could learn from both the revelations and the process of discovery. They understood that legacy is not simply inheritance of property or names, but inheritance of knowledge, understanding, and the courage to confront complexity. By documenting their findings, recording oral histories, and sharing insights, they honored both the past and the generations yet to come. The photograph also served as a reminder of the fragility of memory. Over decades, stories had been altered, forgotten, or misrepresented, and without the photograph, these events might have remained lost forever. It reinforced the necessity of attentive preservation, curiosity, and questioning, even in ordinary family life. The family realized that every object, every letter, and every photograph can hold untold stories, waiting to be recognized and understood. In this way, the photograph was both an artifact and a lesson, a tangible representation of the importance of curiosity, investigation, and reflection in uncovering the fullness of history. Finally, the experience transformed the family's understanding of themselves. They came to see that identity is not fixed. It is shaped by a combination of legacy, choices, and the courage to confront hidden truths. The photograph had forced them to re-examine long-held assumptions, reconcile contradictions, and embrace complexity. They now recognized that family history is not simply a series of events, but a living narrative continuously influenced by both the past and the way it is remembered. By embracing the photograph's revelations, they could move forward with a deeper understanding, compassion, and respect for the intricacies of their heritage. In the end, the photograph's power lay not in the image itself, but in the story it told and the journey it inspired. What had been hidden for 80 years was finally revealed, reshaping the family's understanding of identity, history, and legacy. It reminded them that the past is never truly gone. It lingers in artifacts, memories, and stories waiting to be discovered. By engaging with it thoughtfully and courageously, the family turned discovery into understanding, secrecy into clarity, and history into wisdom. The photograph, once forgotten, had ultimately fulfilled its purpose. It altered the family story, changed their perspective, and ensured that the lessons of the past would endure for generations to come.